Welcome back to Football Unspoken. So, today, Josh, we're going to be talking about player manager relationships. But before we dive into this, I've got an opinionated question for you. Can you tell me what's your favorite player manager bust up?
One that comes to mind is probably maybe this is a harsh one to call a bust up, but Arteta Aubameyang was kind of an interesting one because Aubameyang had carried sort of Arsenal the year before to Arteta's first and only FA Cup as a manager. I'm sure a lot of people tell me that, but because Aubameyang had carried that Arsenal team to that FA Cup, and then not even long into the second season, the first half of the next season, they had this complete fallout, and then he just got sold off to Barcelona. That was just quite an interesting one for me.
Yeah, that's a fair one. I still think my favorite of all time will always be Alex Ferguson and David Beckham. I think that's just the one that will always stick in my mind as a really interesting and rogue situation from where they were. But launching off of that, obviously, we've seen how managers have dealt with some rogue players in public. And at the moment, we're watching Amarim deal with Marcus Rashford. So my question to you is, should managers be allowed to be dragging their players in public like this?
They're allowed to. So the answer to that is yes, but should they? Um, I don't think so because I always think of these situations and like, what's the best case outcome? What's the best case scenario? So I guess the manager, like an Amarin or even Ten Hag when he threw Sancho under the bus, for example, they would probably argue, oh, the best case scenario is he gets a bit embarrassed and therefore he goes, right, I'm going to show you. And he rocks up a training the next week and trains, I guess, in their perspective properly. But almost certainly what will happen 99 times out of 100 is that he gets really angry with you and then goes, stuff this, I'm out of here, or I'm training even less so. And I would argue that's particularly prevalent at the top clubs because if you're Jane Sancho, using that example, you know that if you just down tools, someone else will come get you, whether that's on a loan or a permanent. And he was right because he went off to Dortmund where he had a good relationship with the manager and the fans, and he plays perfectly again. And then he goes off to Chelsea. I wouldn't say he plays perfectly at Chelsea now because they've got so many wingers at that club that it's kind of hit or miss. But the problem is, a lot of those players just know they can down tools and still get a move to another, call it a top division club. And there's always now because of Saudi, there's always that option as well. So that's where I think is actually a lose-lose for the manager is that they almost certainly never going to get that outcome that they're looking for, where the player's going to go, yeah, you're right. I'm going to train much harder, or I'll show you and train much harder as a result of it.
Is there ever a case where this actually works? I think that's the big thing for me. I can't think of many times where, for example, Ruben Amorim drops Marcus Rashford, he comes back, he trains really well. Most of the time, what ends up happening is they just get sold or they just stick in the reserve team until the manager goes, because that's generally the case. Is there any instances in your head that you can think of where it's even partly worked?
I mean, I feel like Mourinho probably would have had some players where he's had a battle with them and they've kind of come back in. I can't name a player, which makes that kind of fall a bit flat. I would think Ferguson as well, but I can't think of any when they public like. I mean, there's been plenty where it's been rumored through the media, but I can't think of any where they publicly ousted the player. Funny enough, an opposite example of that they can think of was when Mourinho wanted to bring Rooney in his second stint of Chelsea. He wanted to bring Rooney from United, and he said in public, Rooney has to come out in public and say, "I want to move to Chelsea." And then he'll come get him. And Rooney didn't. He kind of backed off the whole transfer front at that moment, which had the opposite effect kind of thing. It's not a clash of two players, but it's almost a manager coming out in public to try and draw out the player into the public domain and how that backfired in that scenario.
Yeah, 100%. But I think that was kind of the point I was trying to make. I can't think of any instances where there's been a public berating of a player and the players come back in. The closest I could see is maybe a Luke Shaw. But again, Luke Shaw didn't really excel under Mourinho when it happened. So I do think that there's no real winning in that situation. But the other thing is, do you think there might be, beyond the player and the manager, do you think there might be a bit of a benefit to the club in the fact that it could come out as a bit of a distraction for some poorer performances?
Yeah, I thought of the closest thing I can think of to that example where a player's been berated semi-publicly, but I don't know what else you were going to do in that scenario, was when Xhaka took off the armband and the shirt against Crystal Palace, and he did work his way back in, but he took the shirt and the armband off with Emery, and he came back into the team under Arteta, and so Emery didn't necessarily come publicly and be like, Xhaka's doing terribly. But as the closest example I can think of where there's been this disconnect between the club and the player, and he's managed to work his way back in. In terms of using it as a distraction, a lot of managers have gone down that route. Because I know Mourinho loves doing that, like trying to say outlandish things. Funny enough, even Sam Allardyce, when who was the relegate, he came to one of the relegation teams and tried to save them recently. And the first thing he did when he came in was say, "I'm the best manager in the Premier League," and just going to play against City to try and distract the media away from his team. So I think so. I think what's more interesting is actually more around is if you want to get a player out of your club, right? You just want to get him out as fast as possible. He doesn't want to go because he's on a nice salary. Is that maybe a tactic to get him to go quicker? You call him out, he gets angry, and then he forces the move. He goes to his agent, so I'm not going to stand for this. I'm not going to be embarrassed. I'm going to whatever my corner and protect my corner. And it's maybe almost a funny way of like maybe that's Chelsea's strategy. Players like Mudryk and whatever, they're on the 8-year contracts, can't get rid of them quickly. Just start calling them out in public, and they'll want to leave all of a sudden.
Yeah, so Sam Allardyce was Leeds United that he was with, so that I do remember that. That was quite funny, and I think I just don't think that works. I mean, you look at the best example I have for that is Gareth Bale, where he was getting called out by managers, fans, everyone, Spanish media, and he just ended up being like, "Sick, you guys are paying me £350,000 a week to sit here and play golf. I'll just do that." And you're looking at the Marcus Rashford situation as well. And it's very clear that Amorim doesn't want him. At this point, I think Marcus Rashford could do as well in training as possible. I think there's just a personality clash there. And I do think that, again, Marcus Rashford is sitting there going like, well, I'm getting 350,000 K here. I will sit here and take it until you make a move that works for me. Because at the end of the day, yeah, he might be technically wasting his career, but get to the end of Marcus Rashford's contract at United, and I guarantee you there'll be, even if it's a slight step down, even if you're going to a Newcastle or Villa, you're still going to get £200,000 a week. One of those clubs will do that if you're getting in for free. So there's no benefit of that on my side.
When say a manager comes in and they start isolating an individual, do you think that actually helps the team in any way? Because I can see it like, oh yeah, it was nice to receive praise, but I'm not sure it actually motivates many of the players, as well as the players who weren't isolated and called out almost feel annoyed by that because now you are giving praise to select players. And the reason I mention that is it kind of asks the question of, is there ever a scenario where a manager in public should be isolating a player for praise or criticism?
Look, I think there's definitely moments. I would think a great example I have is Lee Bowyer and Kieran Dyer. You have to come out and say that's unacceptable behavior. Or if your player takes a swing and so you have to come out and criticize that performance. There's absolutely no way that you can. In the same way that if you're losing 2-0, you sub on Amad Diallo and he scores a hat trick in 20 minutes. He deserves the praise. And I think there is a situation, and I look at it in my own life. You get to your annual review and you get told in front of everyone, oh, Rob's done fantastically this year. He's made the X many sales. You do feel good and you start feeling a bit appreciated. And I don't think there's too many players who are going to be discouraged by that, being like, oh, he's getting singled out and I'm not. They'd probably give the other players a bit more motivation if they're seeing that happen. But obviously, if they're going, oh yeah, Marcus Rashford's played like an absolute idiot, and then Alejandro Garnacho came in and he saved the game, then there might be a bit of a problem. But the last kind of point I wanted to make is I found an interesting connection in the fact that most of the major bust-ups have been with guys like Pep Guardiola. Pep Guardiola had Samuel Eto'o, he had Zlatan Ibrahimovic. You have Jose Mourinho with about 8 different players, Paul Pogba, Luke Shaw. You have Sir Alex Ferguson with David Beckham and Roy Keane. Is there a case to potentially say that maybe this is a motivational tactic if these top managers are doing it and they have remained top managers?
I actually think the reason you got a lot of examples there is because the elite managers have certain expectations. We talk about standards. I think you can have another debate on whether it's standards or just it will be like this, regardless of what you think. And the elite managers tend to be a lot firmer with that. It will be like this, not like that for their players. And then you have someone who's quite, the elite players also have strong minds of their own and opinions of their own. So that's why you'll see more clashes with an elite manager with an elite player than you would maybe with a mid-table team and mid-table players. I remember Emery saying something about when he came into Aston Villa, the most important thing for him was just to win the first game, which obviously for every manager, but the reason was not just to get 3 points. The reason was to show the players his tactics work, because then everyone would just blindly believe in him from that moment on, which is kind of what's happened at Villa successfully because they're doing well. So it's not a bad thing, but and that you can do that with a mid-table team and with players like the Aston Villa squad. But if you do that in Manchester United, for example, just winning one game isn't going to make Rashford blindly follow you and do everything that you say, like, live off every word. So I think that's the reason why elite managers have a lot more conflict with elite players. What I did find funny, what you said was, I think Guardiola, of the examples you named, was the only manager who would sign players and then fight with them. Where the other examples you gave, say Luke Shaw at Manchester United, Luke Shaw was already there when Mourinho came. He didn't choose to sign him, and it wasn't a Mourinho player. So he kind of exiled him. It was just funny to me that Pep was the only manager signing players and then fighting with them anyway.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I like your idea around the elite mentalities kind of clashing, because that probably is what it is. It's teams who are consistently used to winning, managers and players used to winning, don't like losing, and they will take their frustrations out on each other. But this has been a very interesting discussion. I appreciated your thoughts on the matter, and I would love to hear what you guys think about this. Is there ever a situation where managers should be dragging their players in public? Or is it just an unnecessary distraction that allows for a media storyline? Let us know in the comments. And until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.